Great. So, hi Philip, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you, Olo.
Great. So I purposely didn't give you any prep, any read before you get here, so that you can feel comfortable, so that it's authentic, it's from the heart, it's just keep it real, I guess. And I just wanted it to flow as well. So just so that's just a bit easier for me. This is my kind of like interview kind of style. So I hope that works.
It's good for me.
So as you know, I've launched a podcast. It's called Not Your Everyday Podcast, and the aim of the podcast is three things. One, it's to basically it's about fear. So quite often we don't talk about our fears because we're not confident about talking about it. And especially in the social media world, and people only show their success, their announcements, their highlights, but people are afraid to talk about what they really struggle with. And I wanted to dispel myths about fear, especially from young people and more senior people, and basically create a conversation and educate the audience, the people who want to listen, how important it is to talk about fear. And basically dispel some myths about being a leader and the things that you go through. The second thing was about millennials. So there's loads of research actually about why this particular generation, this particular group, millennials, are going to be the future leaders of our generation. And there's loads of campaigns from Me Too to Time's Up. There's so many, and they're being led by young people. And there's this real sense of like I'm empowered through social media, through my own voice to create change, and that change is real. And you can have millions of followers overnight, quite literally, which couldn't have happened years ago. So now we're living in different times. So it's basically, I wanted to talk about millennials and your take on how you see millennials being the future leaders of this generation, of our generation, and then thirdly, just to talk about yourself and your background and how you got to where you are. So.
Right.
Great.
Okay.
So the first thing I'm going to ask, what's your name and what do you do? Let's keep it simple.
Well, I'm Philip Davidson. I'm the managing partner of KPMG in the UK until tomorrow. Tomorrow I step down as managing partner in the UK. Cool.
And what does your job involve? What do you do on a day-to-day?
So I oversee the entire UK business of KPMG, audit, tax, consulting and deal advisory, and all of our coverage groups, financial services, corporates and national markets. So I provide guidance, coaching and management, performance management for the leaders within our business who are overseeing all of our 16,000 people.
Great. That must be a really difficult job. What effect does it have on you, having that much responsibility?
So it is a difficult job because every day is different and every day is pretty much unpredictable. There's a certain structure to the reporting cycle and so forth. But in a big organisation, a £2 billion organisation with 16,000 people, 600 and odd partners, there's something new happening every day, unpredictable, and that is hard. And also, running a business of this size is difficult anyway. You're coping with a portfolio of different types of businesses, each with different dynamics, in a market that itself has different dynamics. The impact of socioeconomic circumstances, political circumstances, Brexit, all have an impact on the business, which is not necessarily predictable from day to day.
And just to switch gears a little, do you remember when we first met?
I do.
And what was your recollection of when we met and your impression of me at that point?
Well, so depends which meeting you're talking about. We sort of formally met in our first reverse mentoring meeting, but we had actually met at a focus group that I ran prior to that, which led to the reverse mentoring program. My recollection of first meeting you was at the end of a focus group meeting, where you were really enthusiastic about what we could achieve, and you were keen to make sure that the things that had been discussed weren't just things that were discussed, that they were going to lead to action. And I felt like you were testing me. You were testing whether I actually was going to make things happen. And you weren't going to let me leave the room until you got some sense of commitment. And then we formally met at our first reverse mentoring, where I thought you were testing me. You were testing to see just how open to the process I was really going to be, and whether I understood what reverse mentoring was, whether it was going to be about you giving me insight, rather than a senior person in the organisation providing you with insight. And I thought we had a pretty good meeting. We learnt a lot about each other. We set aside that meeting just to learn a bit about each other, and we did.
Yeah. So do you know that it's been over 2.5 years that we've been in a reverse mentoring relationship, and we've created some change, don't you think?
We have, yeah.
Just to name a few for those who don't know, reverse mentoring, we've launched it across our UK offices, and we have over 160 colleagues involved. Yep. Black Entrepreneur Awards, where we launched just last year in November. We had 3 winners, and one of the winners is doing really well, that they won $500,000. And we're
not from us.
Not from us. Not from us.
I think we spurred them on to a bigger win.
But what we did do was we're showing that we're supporting ethnic minority entrepreneurs. We're helping them grow as a business, and we're trying to make sure that they don't have any barriers, and then they have the mentoring, the coaching, and the things that they need, right?
Yeah.
And that came about from our relationship, from our one-to-ones, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if you think about the stuff that we have done, how are you pleased, or was there things that you wanted to do more? What surprised you? What's your natural, when you think back on what we've accomplished so far?
Yeah, well, to those, the 2 big things that you talked about, the whole reverse mentoring program that we piloted, that I'm very proud of. That's bringing real insight into the leadership of the business every day. With 80 pairs of people, we're really getting a sense in the leadership of what it feels like to be a junior colleague, and specifically to be a black colleague within KPMG, and what the barriers are, what the hurdles might be, why it doesn't feel like we've got a level playing field in places, and what we need to do to level the playing field. So that insight it's flowing around the organisation in a really exciting way. Black Entrepreneurs Award, in a way it might seem counterintuitive that we're sponsoring something that is helping to make people who don't work for KPMG more successful. But the point of it is that as we explored why people leave organisations like KPMG, there was a very real sense that people, particularly black people, reach a point where they don't feel that they're necessarily going to progress any further. And that's not just KPMG, it's lots of large organisations. And so oftentimes they do go on to set up their own business, because their perception is that any other large organisation is going to be kind of the same. And so let's go at this myself. And so what we agreed is that if that is happening, then we can achieve a couple of things. One, we can help make those people more successful, because they are talented people who can be successful. So let's play a part in that. But then secondly, it does tap us into a very vibrant, dynamic community. It's a group of people who think differently about business. And again, I'd like our organisation to learn from those people, to see what we can bring back into this organisation, and also to demonstrate to black talent around the country that we're interested, we care, we're committed, and some people will then choose to join KPMG because of that sense of commitment. So both really important pieces, but there's lots under the hood as well.
Yeah.
So one of our very first conversations, can't remember whether it was the first one or the second one, we talked about how work allocation right at the beginning of somebody's career makes a big difference. And up until that point, my mind was in kind of top-down mode. How do we get partners and directors to think differently about black talent in the organisation? And what I realised from that conversation is that if those decisions are being made really early on that cause a divergence in people's career paths, then it's not partners and directors that are likely to be influencing it. It is really quite junior colleagues. And so we need to change our processes right at that level to make sure that people start their career on a level playing field.
Yeah. So I want to move on to talking about fear. And this could be a tough conversation or easy conversation. Depends on how your take on it. So being a managing partner of KPMG, what fears do you have and how did you overcome those fears?
I think one of my strongest motivating fears, and I think fear is a big motivator. It's probably, for some of us, it's a bigger motivator than ambition is. My strongest motivating fear is a fear of letting people down. It's the sense of responsibility that I probably for reasons of my upbringing carry with me all of the time, which means that when you're running an organisation like KPMG with a sense of responsibility and a desire not to let people down and a fear of letting people down, that can be quite a weighty motivator and also quite a difficult thing to cope with, because there's a lot of people that I could let down and have done. If I make decisions every day, lots of decisions every day, not every one of those decisions is going to be right, and as a result some people are going to be disappointed or worse, and that is hard to bear if you fear letting people down. So I've just had to try to rationalise that concern, to be clear that if I make 10 decisions over the course of a day and I get 9 of them right, and I hope actually more often than not I get more than that right over the course of a day, then I'm helping more people than I'm letting down. And that is the way that I've tried to rationalise that fundamental behavioural concern that I've got. But it's big, it's a fear of letting down the people I work for, so Bill, the board, the global organisation. It's fear of letting down my peers, my fellow executive members, fear of letting down people within the organisation, more junior people, my family, my friends. It is definitely for me a stronger motivator than a desire to be successful. Right.
And how do you tackle in the event that you do let people down? What is your mind telling you? What is your brain telling you? How do you react? What are the practical things you do? Because as you said, 9 out of 10 times you do well, but that one instance that you make the wrong decision or you make the wrong call, how do you get back to your normal self?
My style, my approach, my ethos even is openness and honesty. And so when I've made a decision that's had an adverse impact on people or on the business, I'll just be honest about it. I'll be clear about why I made that decision. What were the circumstances? What were the facts that I was evaluating? I'll be clear on why I thought that was the right decision at the time. And sometimes, even after I know it's not achieved the outcome that I was expecting, I'll still believe that it was the right decision because I'll know what it was that I was evaluating at the time. And so I'll be clear and honest about that as well. And I have found that honesty does two things. It reduces my burden because I'm sharing with people a clear and transparent account of what I've done and why.
Yeah.
And secondly, it does engender support. If people can understand why you've made a decision that has adversely impacted them personally sometimes, if they can understand that and they feel like you're taking responsibility for it, they are inclined to be more supportive. Not every time, but sometimes.
And does it have an effect on your confidence? So when you make a bad decision or a decision that doesn't go as well as you thought, does it have an effect on your self-belief? Because quite often, junior colleagues who want to be leaders and well, most colleagues, I guess, who have an aspiration of being a leader, they tend to have this imposter syndrome sometimes where they don't feel that they deserve to be at a particular place, or they don't feel comfortable because they made a decision that was bad, and then they feel like they're exposed all of a sudden because they didn't get everything right. And one of the myths about leadership is, you have to know everything, but I don't think that's true. So how do you deal with that in terms of your confidence and your self-belief in your abilities?
Yeah, so as you asked that question, I'm remembering a particular episode quite a few years ago, shortly after I'd become a partner. So I was made partner relatively young. I was in my very early 30s when I became a partner. And at the same time, we'd gone through a bit of a reorganisation, and I became the leader of my part of the business quite quickly. We were going, as a country, we were going through a kind of mini recession, and there was a lot of restructuring work, which was my specialism, and big restructuring work. And so I had a lot of big responsibility very early on. Mm-hmm. And there was one particular job that I was working on, which was a big transatlantic communications company, and on a big open conference call with the company that we were restructuring and a lot of their banks and lawyers, I made a statement that I had all of the facts to back up. It was an accurate statement, but it was mistimed. I chose the wrong moment to raise the issue that I raised. And it took the course of the conference call completely off. We went down a different route than we would otherwise have gone down. And it proved to be massively destructive to the process, not just in the very near term, but for quite some weeks afterwards. And I knew that I'd made a mistake. The client contacted a senior partner within the organisation, told them I'd made a mistake, so there was no question about it. But I'd already contacted that partner and said, look, this has happened. This is what I said and why I said it. But I'm going to need some help here. And I got the help that I needed. But interestingly, it hit my self-confidence quite hard. And I then found it difficult providing the right sort of client advice at the right time because I was nervous. And secondly, just running the business that I was responsible for running, I lost some confidence from that as well. And actually, a few weeks later, a few months later, can't remember quite what the timescale was, I went to my boss at the time and said, look, I think this is too much for me. I can't run these big assignments and run this business, and I think you need to get somebody else to run the business. We had a series of meetings, and basically what he said to me was, there is nobody else that can run the business in the way that you can. so you're just going to have to do it, but I'm going to help you. And he provided me a lot of coaching to get me through what was a difficult 6 months. And at the end of the 6 months, I was definitely a better leader. I was a more thoughtful client advisor, and I was stronger as a person. But it did play strongly to that fear, because I did let people down.
Yeah, it's really fascinating that you were able to ask for help in the moment you needed help, because quite often we'll be silent and then we'll ask for help maybe too late in the process. But it's interesting to hear from you that you didn't feel any shame in asking for help. And quite often, I don't know, well, some of the myths about leadership is that it's hard, it's quite lonely, and it's hard to ask for help because everybody thinks you should be telling everybody else what to do, basically.
Yep.
But it probably is a value of yours, honesty and transparency, and that's helped you helped you solve problems or go down different routes because you're able to have those honest conversations in the moments that you need it. So I think that's a really telling story, a really inspiring story as well for people who want to be leaders as well, because.
And I really do hope that if there's something that I can help people with, it is that asking for help is exactly the right thing to do. And people do sometimes perceive asking for help as a weakness, but it isn't. It's a strength. And again, I as we talk, there's another example of I've promoted a lot of people to partner, recruited people into the organisation. There are a couple of guys that I made partner probably 10 years ago now, so around about the same time, but two very different characters. One of them, who's proved to be immensely successful, no longer with KPMG but out in the marketplace. There was a time that he was advising a group of banks, and he was in a meeting with this senior group of banks, and they asked him a question, and he said to them, well, this is my view, but that's a really important question, and so what I'd like to do is consult with my boss, Philip Davidson, and using the conference telephone on the table, he called me up. And I picked up the phone, and he said, Philip, I'm with this group of banks and this question's just been raised and I'd like to get your view on it. And he didn't know what I would say because I was presented with the question there and then. And I gave my response to it, which broadly tallied with what he'd said, and he put the phone down. And in my office at the time was the other guy. And I relayed to him what had just happened, and he said, well, he's crazy. Those bankers will have no confidence in him at all if he can't answer a question without consulting. So I talked to the first guy later in the day when he came back to the office and said, how did that turn out? And he said, oh, they loved it. They loved the fact that they didn't just get my view, but they got the senior KPMG view as well. And in fact, they'd like us to talk to them about, and it was another piece of work. And so what we got there was two very different philosophies. We had somebody who was prepared to show a bit of vulnerability by saying, I just want to check that. I want to ask and get the best possible advice. And the response of the people around wasn't to lose confidence, it was to gain confidence, because they then knew that in the difficult situations he would make the right calls. Yeah,
that's amazing, because I think back to my times when I first joined the firm and I was shy. I couldn't ask for help, and that was one of my fears. My fear was linked to the fact that asking for help is a sign of weakness. This is what society told me, this is what I saw. Asking for help meant that I didn't know what I was doing and I shouldn't be here. On top of that, it was an ethnic minority, so I also thought if I asked for help, it might feed into some stereotypes, some negative stereotypes. And so I had a double consciousness of, I can't ask for help, I'm an ethnic minority, I don't want to look more weak because I'm perceiving myself as being disadvantaged in a place that's a majority. So I couldn't feel comfortable asking for help until later down the process, when I started having reverse mentoring sessions and I started to gain my confidence, and that changed everything because I was able to ask for help in the moments that I needed it, and it became a strength for me. And then it also allowed me to unlock vulnerability. So that's why this podcast started. That's why I'm able to feel confident to talk about my fears and talk about the things that challenge me the most, because I've been able to get help when I need it. So it's quite interesting how we both have similar fears, but we deal with it quite differently as well. So
yep. I think it is really interesting, this point about asking for help. I get that a lot of people, for people, that is a fear, but it's fascinating that when you look at the research about what builds bonds between people, you might think that the bond from the person who asks for help to the person who gives the help is strong, that there's a kind of debt owed. But actually what the research shows is that the person who gives the help has a stronger sense of bond to the person who asks for it as well. There's sort of a responsibility that is conveyed because you've given advice or you've given help. And so it is a real two-way thing. But it starts with being prepared to, one, realise that you need some help, and two, then be prepared to ask for it.
That's really good. What would you tell yourself, what would you tell your 21-year-old self? If you can cast your mind back.
Blimey. What would I tell my 21-year-old self? So I would try to enjoy myself a bit more. I was a pretty serious 21-year-old new starter at what was then Peat Marwick in Manchester. I was focused, and it's good to be focused, but I don't think I allowed myself to expand, to see the whole organisation, to understand the people around me as much as I could have done. And if I'd relaxed a little bit, then that would have helped. I came from a family that I guess these days you'd describe as lower middle class. I was the first in my family to go to university. I wasn't particularly confident when I started with the firm 30 odd years ago, and I think if I could tell myself that everybody around me was sharing the same fears and concerns that I was, and that I wasn't unusual, then that would probably have helped. I believed that everybody else was feeling much better about life, was more confident in their own abilities, understood better how to get on in the organisation. I thought all of those things. If I'd known that everybody was thinking exactly the same as I was, which is, oh my God, what do I do next? Then I guess I would have felt more confident.
Was there any point in your career you realised that you didn't have to be somebody you're not?
Yes, I think there was. There was as I got more senior, the expectation increased that I would front up presentations, client meetings. And it was something that I did fear. I feared public speaking because I guess, like everybody, I thought I was just going to mess it up. And so what I did to begin with was kind of create a persona. There was the Philip that did presentations, and I convinced myself that I could act this positive person. And it worked. It helped me get through the first year of giving presentations and fronting up client meetings. And I literally did have an act. When I was doing big presentations, sometimes they were to a couple of hundred people, I did what I called the £20 challenge. So right at the beginning, I'd get £20 out of my wallet and I'd ask a question, and whoever got the question right, I'd go and give them the 20 quid. And it was a real icebreaker for the audience, but mainly for me, because it kind of got me into the groove of the presentation. And after about a year, there was a particular big presentation where the timings had all gone awry because an earlier speaker had overrun. I had to cut my piece down, and there wasn't time to do the opener. And I got to the end of it and realised that I hadn't done my usual act. I'd just been me, because I hadn't had time to get into the groove. And that was the moment that I realised that I'd got past needing the persona. I could just be me. And after that, it became a lot more comfortable.
It's great that you have recollection of that, because it's important to study yourself, and it's clear that you're a man that studies himself. You've picked a moment in your career that you realise you went from not having confidence to building confidence to then realising that you don't need a particular thing to do what you now do on a day-to-day. So that's really great. What motivates you to create change when the process is slow, the process involves a lot of red tape? How do you stay motivated?
I focus on the outcomes that I'm aiming for, and I am very realistic that you can get some outcomes you can achieve in a very short space of time. The things that you can directly control. Other outcomes that are dependent on a multitude of factors can take a long time. And so I have a sort of mental portfolio. I like to get outcomes. I like to get things moving to achieve change. So I make sure that there are some short-term things that I absolutely can directly control, that I can get moving quickly. And they generate a bit of sort of positive emotional spirit, and that gives me the patience to go at the longer term things in a structured way, which knowing that eventually the thing that I'm trying to achieve will come good. So for example, I knew that when we talked about Black Entrepreneurs Award, that was within my gift. I could make sure that happened. Now, it took us a little bit longer than we intended to, but actually it happened in exactly the way that we intended it to. That gave me quite a lot of energy, and at the same time I was helping global colleagues get the global strategy in place, which was definitely a long haul job, and we were making some big changes in the UK firm, which again was a long haul job. And so I got a bit of energy from that helped me to be patient in the other areas.
So just going back to a question answered earlier, one of the answers you mentioned about Philip the presenter. How do you become, I guess, how do you manage people's perceptions of you? Because you manage yourself in a way that you gave yourself a persona. And you said you're Philip the presenter, till you became the presenter. How do you manage other people's perceptions? For example, we had a discussion earlier on about likability and respect. And would you say that, that's going to be your answer here in the sense that
That was where I was going.
Yeah, okay, I'll let you explain what he means by that.
Right, okay. What matters a lot to me is whether people respect me, whether people respect my expertise and my judgment. And what that means is that I focus a lot on my personal quality, on my outputs, my outcomes, and my thinking processes, because those things help people to respect me and my decisions, which means that they are more likely to follow and to do what I think is the right thing for the organisation and for them as individuals. Now, people also follow because of likability. They'll follow people that they really like. I have found over my career that followership through likability is very short term. It doesn't help an organization, doesn't help a leader of an organization to achieve major change, because oftentimes change is unpopular. And likability and popularity are very strongly linked. What helps an organization to change is belief. And belief, in my view, comes from respect more than likability. So in how I manage my personas, if the example that you gave of the presenter persona, actually, I just want people to see the person in front of them, the Philip Davidson in front of them, and have respect for expertise and belief in what I'm trying to achieve. And that does mean being transparent.
We're running out of time now, unfortunately. Right. So the last question that I try to end my interviews on Not Your Everyday podcast is a question that you probably have to think about before you give an answer, or maybe you might have an answer actually. So I'm going to make sure I get this question right. Yes. So how would you define your leadership style?
How would I define my leadership style? I would say that, so first of all, I've got a confident leadership style. I am confident in the decisions that I make because, secondly, I get into the detail. I really understand the business that I'm running, and I've done my homework. I've made sure that either I've got really strong experts reporting into me, giving me the right information that I need to make the decisions I need to make, or I've gone one level further down and I've gained the expertise that I need. So I'm confident because I've got a grasp of the detail, and that carries quite a long way. But then I think the personal attributes that I add to that are honesty and transparency. I think the people that deal with me in business know that I'm being honest with them, and they know that I'm being as transparent as any leader can be in a particular situation, and therefore that engenders trust, and trust is fundamentally important in any business relationship, whether it's between a leader and their organization or between two different organizations. And so my leadership style, I think, engenders trust.
Great. So this is probably the last thing I would probably say is there any questions for me before we wrap up? Because I'm conscious that I don't want it to just be me asking you loads of questions. If there was one question you had to ask me, is there any at the moment? Or if there isn't, then that's fine.
What do you want to achieve with this podcast? What would great look like for you?
So great would mean that this podcast goes into schools, goes into universities, goes into colleges, and it educates young people who are thinking about careers, who want to become leaders, who have aspirations of being great, to think early on before they get into the workplace, what does it take to be a leader? We've now heard from Philip Davidson, managing partner of KPMG, of some of the fears, some of the concerns, how he deals with being a leader, and how he asks for help, and all of this is him being a human. And I wanted to humanize leadership and to break down barriers of what does it take to be a leader, and anybody can be a leader. So I hope the point of this podcast is to spur a conversation about fear, to be comfortable talking about fear, but also to people who are coming up the ranks and people who have big dreams and want to be great, and they're about to start the workforce or they're in the workforce, just to give them the confidence and the self-belief through these conversations that they can be a leader. through some of the examples that you gave and some of the discussions that we've had to give them the confidence that you can lead with fear, and like confidence isn't just eliminating your fears. It's a transformation of your fears, a transformed relationship of your fears. So yeah, I hope it encourages people to ask more questions.
Excellent. Right. Well, I wish you every success with that.
Thank you very much, Philip. Great. That was good. What do you think?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it felt like a proper conversation through most of it. So we didn't cover all of the topics that
that's
you
fine.
laid out at the beginning, but that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Excellent.
great. So I know you're late for your next meeting, so
Yeah.
I will leave you to it. But thank you for the time, and I appreciate it. Now that you're off, I guess tomorrow is the last day, so
Yeah.
that must be exciting.
Cheers, Ollie.
Cheers.